Welcome to this explainer. I am so incredibly pumped to dive into today's topic with you all. We're going to be exploring some genuinely powerful frameworks that will literally change the way you look at both wealth and life. But hey, before we get into the heavy hitting concepts, I want you to just pause for a second and think about something. Exactly how many people do you think are actually good at picking stocks?
Seriously, think about it. I mean, we all kind of think we can beat the casino, right? It's just human nature. We want to believe we have this special edge, that we can spot the magical patterns everyone else is somehow missing. But the reality of active investing, well, it's incredibly stark.
The answer is less than 1%. Yeah, well under 1%. Look, if you just want a great return without the total brain damage, 90% of people should honestly just buy a passive index fund and go enjoy their lives. Seriously, it takes zero effort and you'll beat almost everybody else out there. But today, we're building a framework for that top 1% who actually want to put in the work. And to do that, we're looking at a concept heavily favored by the absolute legend Charlie Munger.
So, what is it? The lattice work of mental models is basically the practice of combining overlapping frameworks to create what Munger called a Lollapalooza effect. This is where 1 plus 1 doesn't just equal 2, it equals 11. Over the next few minutes, we're going to ascend through this sequence of mental tools that build directly upon each other, compounding to give you a truly massive edge. Okay, let's dive right into this roadmap. We're starting with the top 1%. Then we'll move into the art of inaction, explore cloning and randomness, examine simple ideas taken seriously, and finally, we'll pivot to the inner scorecard and living an aligned life.
All right, section 1, the top 1% transferring wealth. To really understand these mental models, you first have to respect the absolutely brutal reality of capital markets. And this brilliantly illustrates the math. Over the last 90 years, a tiny 4% of companies delivered the entire market return. The other 96% of businesses, they simply treaded water. The whole reason a broad index fund does so amazingly well is that it's, quite frankly, just too dumb to sell that winning 4%. It perfectly lines up with what Warren Buffett famously said. The stock market is a mechanism to transfer wealth from the active to the inactive. The market basically acts like a giant casino where hyperactive gamblers are just continuously trading. And by doing so, they are willingly funding the returns of the deeply, deeply patient. Which leads us perfectly into our next model. Moving on to section 2, the art of inaction, watching paint dry. Most people think investing is all about having a super high IQ or building these lightning-fast algorithms. It's totally not. Investing success is almost entirely about temperament. It's about the joy of literally watching paint dry. Consider this wife versus mistress metaphor. The wife represents the asset you already own. You know her flaws, you understand her deeply, and because of that familiarity, she's often unfairly discounted in your mind. The mistress, on the other hand, is the asset you don't own. She looks hot, the risks are completely unknown, and so she is highly, highly tempting. The urge to swap a perfectly good understood asset for a shiny new unknown one, that is exactly how portfolios are ruined. You literally must maintain an incredibly high bar for taking action.
All right, section 3, cloning and randomness, unfair advantages.
So how do you actually find the best ideas when you're just sitting still? Well, you have to introduce randomness to shake up your mental snow globe. Pick up a completely random book at the airport. Talk to pre-filtered, above-average strangers on a flight. Or, my absolute favorite, go somewhere you totally don't belong. Take this incredible anecdote of a tech entrepreneur attending FarmCon in Kansas City, a completely unrelated event where he was a total fish out of water. But that pure randomness introduced him to a highly successful daily newsletter for farmers, which sparked a genuinely multi-million-dollar idea. Because of that random trip to FarmCon, that entrepreneur decided to simply clone the farmer newsletter model, but he applied it to the emerging crypto market. That became the Milk Road newsletter, built with literally zero original ideas, which eventually sold for millions. Yet, despite these public playbooks just sitting there, we humans are remarkably poor at cloning winning strategies. We let our egos get in the way because, we all want to be original. Contrast this with Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart. He wasn't some kind of genius, but he unapologetically copied every single good retail idea he ever saw to build an absolute empire. And this leads right into another unfair advantage. Let's compare traditional competitors to Elon Musk's Idiot Index. Traditional auto and aerospace companies usually price out a part by looking at what a finished component costs from a competitor. But Elon's Idiot Index, it looks strictly at the base cost of raw materials on the London Metal Exchange. By applying this completely different first principles model, he builds rockets at an absolute fraction of the cost, creating massive successes like SpaceX and Tesla.
The crazy part here, his competitors know exactly what he's doing, but they still absolutely refuse to clone it because it's just not in their DNA. Which brings us to Section 4, Simple Ideas Taken Seriously, the 2x4 to the head.
This specific mental model requires having the sheer courage to go aggressively all in when an incredibly obvious opportunity finally presents itself. Let's walk through this amazing case study of a Turkish warehouse company. Step 1. Find a hyperactive, chaotic market. In this case, Turkey, where the currency was literally crashing and investors were fleeing in a panic. Step 2. Identify an asset entirely immune to that inflation. I mean, what is a warehouse? It's just land, cement, steel, and paint. Those things hold their value regardless of what the currency is doing. Step 3. Invest heavily at a deep discount. By finding this prime business trading at just 3% of its liquidation value, the investor yielded a massive 90x return in US dollars, despite the local currency completely collapsing. No way, right? But it's true.
Now, these incredibly rare deals share a few key traits. The business is understandable to a 10-year-old, it possesses an enduring moat in a prime location, it's completely immune to macroeconomic noise. As the legendary insurance operator Ajit Jain says, your default answer should always be no, until a deal metaphorically smacks you right in the head like a 2x4.
So the absolutely crucial point here is captured perfectly by this quote. If you cannot explain your investing thesis to a 10-year-old in about 4 sentences, it's a pass. Spreadsheets, super complex projections, and highly theoretical math, those are the enemies of a great investment. If the value isn't painfully obvious, just walk away. Section 5. The Inner Scorecard. True Validation. Okay, here is where we pivot from financial frameworks to profound life philosophy, marking the real peak of our mental latticework ascension. The outer scorecard is driven entirely by external metrics. It's reacting to critics, desperately needing public applause, and constantly worrying about what the world thinks of you. The inner scorecard, however, is measured purely by internal metrics and brutal self-honesty. Relying on external validation will inevitably make you miserable, honestly, because you're just a slave to the crowd. Internal alignment? That brings true, unshakable peace. I actually want to pose Warren Buffett's ultimate test of the inner scorecard to you right now. Think about this. Would you rather be the world's absolute worst lover, but universally known to everyone as the greatest? Or would you rather be the greatest lover in the world, but known by everyone as the absolute worst? How you answer that forces you to brutally confront exactly where you draw your validation from. Section 6. Living an Aligned Life. Getting Your Music Out. This brings us to the final, and really the most profound mental model, ensuring your daily actions align perfectly with your true innate self. Benjamin Franklin issued an incredibly stark warning about this. Many people die at 25 and are buried at 75. Just think about the absolute tragedy of that for a second. To stop growing, to stop taking risks, and to just live an unaligned, coasting existence for 50 years until you're finally put in the ground. To have a truly great life, your internal calling simply must perfectly align with your external actions. Psychologically speaking, your basic personality cake is baked by age 5. Yet the world, and our education system, constantly tries to force us to become a jack of all trades. The ultimate goal in life isn't just to acquire capital, it's to avoid that trap, to zero in on what you're uniquely built for, and to get your own unique music out into the world. Which leaves us right here at the end. So are you living by an inner or outer scorecard? And what is the music you need to get out? I want to leave you with this final, truly provocative thought. We only have a finite amount of time on this earth. Ascending this latticework of mental models isn't just about picking the right stocks or building a massive company. It's about designing a life that is deeply, authentically, and powerfully yours. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this sparks you to find your music. Catch you next time.